Hey, everybody, this is Craig Garber. Welcome to Everyone Loves Guitar. We have a super interesting guest today, very successful professional in Nashville and record producing and engineering with Joe West. A couple of quick announcements. First of all, I just want to say a shout out and a thank you to Mario Biffarali from Godin for connecting us. Thanks, Mario. And also make sure you go to everyonelovesguitar.com/subscribe and subscribe to the audio and video portions. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and the bell down there. Joe West, Grammy Award Winning Producer, Mixer, and Hit Songwriter. As a songwriter, he's had multiple #1 singles as well as cuts with Keith Urban, Toby Keith, Tim McGraw, Jimmy Wayne, Warrant, and many others. And his music has been featured in over 100 network, cable, and feature films. As a producer and mix engineer, he's worked with Joey and Rory, Emmy Lou Harris, Warren Zevon, Shakira, Justin Timberlake, Steve Earle, Matthew Sweet, the Indigo Girls. I had Amy Ray on here, man. She was really funny. And other Grammy-winning and multi-platinum selling artists. Joe wrote, produced, and mixed Jimmy Wayne's #1 hit and title track, Do You Believe Me Now, as well as Toby Keith's fastest rising #1 song, American Ride, and Keith Urban's #1, Without You. Joe also has 2 songs on Tim McGraw's #1 record, Emotional Traffic. Other artists he's worked with in various capacities include Rusted Root, The Cramps. This is pretty diverse. Joe D. Messina, Mandy Moore, and Jewel, and tons of others. I had to lot this. That was like the pimple on the elephant's back here, man. And he's also mixed a ton of TV and cable soundtracks. You have, and thank you, man. I really appreciate you. How many Grammys do you have?
Well, the Grammys, that's an interesting topic. People will say you're a Grammy Award winner if, let's say you're a guitar player and you played on a song that won a Grammy. You're not a Grammy Award winner. So you'll get a little sheet of paper that says you participated in a Grammy Award-winning record. They only give you a statue if you actually have, depending on the category, it's like if you worked on 51% of the record or you're the producer.
Okay.
There's very specific rules. I was nominated for a Grammy for Emmy Lou Harris's Stumble into Grace, which was a record that I engineered. Malcolm Byrne was the producer, and Daniel Lanois produced on that record. And that was in 2002. It was nominated for Best Contemporary Folk Album. And in that same category, because I had done the Emmy Lou Harris record, we had done a duet with Warren Zevon. He was nominated in that same category and won. So if Emmy had won, I would have got a Grammy for that. But Warren won, and I just worked on the one song, so I never requested it, but I could have gotten one of those sheets of paper.
Certificate.
And then I won a Grammy, actually went out to L.A. and walked up on stage, the whole deal, for the Joey and Rory record in 2018.
But you were heavily involved in that.
Yeah, I produced that record. I mixed that record.
And you played all the instruments on it, didn't you?
Not on the Joey and Rory record. No, that was a real bluegrassy record.
Okay.
And, the interesting story there, Rory Feek is just a buddy of mine. He wanted to sign me to a publishing deal when I came to town. And then he asked me to make the record with him. And Joey was really sick at that time. This was right before she passed. And it was a record that we had to kind of do. We had to piece that record together. Not a lot of the people were, not a lot of the performances were in the same room. So some of the vocal tracks were from a bus or was from a hotel room where she was getting treatment, or, she's, just sitting at a desk in a hotel room and on a little Apogee USB mic. The other second verse might be through a C12 at my studio or at another studio, or, from anywhere. So it was a really different record, and it was good for me because I was in Nashville. There's not a lot of guys now. There might be a lot more, but there's not a lot of guys that were really proficient at pulling something like that together. So I was a good fit for that record.
It's great.
And it was a record that I went on thinking, there's not much. I'm doing this for my friends, and then it went on to be the biggest selling record. It was all genre, the biggest selling record on Billboard. Across the board, from hip hop, pop, and R&B. It was a 20-week, 15-week #1. It was just this massive, unexpected thing that just took off because the story of that record, the story of their lives was really intertwined with that record.
Yeah. Have you ever been on something where something else like that where you weren't expecting it, and it just exploded? Or the other way where oh man, this is going to be everything, and it nothing?
Every year. I got this little production school, and I tell my students that it's like you just got to plant as many seeds as you can, because you never know what's going to come up. And you're always working at the super high level. You're trying to be the best version of yourself. Sometimes you look back on it and say that came out better than I expected, or I missed it with that one. But at the end of the day, you never know what's going to pay the bills for the next 3 or 4 years. You know,
that's true. I think in any entrepreneurial venture, you throw enough arrows, shoot enough arrows out of your quiver and something's going to stick, but you don't know what it's going to be. And usually it's not the reason you think.
Yeah.
All righty. Joe, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. You got like a tremendous background. I want to,
oh, I thought you were signing off already. I was like, all right,
Joe, it's been great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
You started out working as an engineer in Pittsburgh, and then you moved to New York. How'd you first get started in the music business, and what kind of break or what prompted you to go to New York?
So I was in Pittsburgh, and I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Rudy.
Yeah, but football. Sure.
It felt just like Rudy, because I had applied to Berkeley in Boston. It was my dream to go to Berkeley School of Music in Boston. I got accepted. But, we were in the steel mill crisis, and there was no money. And I was expecting, and I don't know where it would have came from, but I was just expecting the money to show up. At that time, it was $18,000 either a year or a semester to go there. It was just beyond our means. And I never got to go. And I was like kind of crushed by it, and like feeling like the universe had let me down. And my father, who was a steel worker, who then was a janitor trying to make ends meet.
Yeah.
So why don't you go up to a television station and sweep the floors and just be around it and see what could happen. And I did that, but I did it at a recording studio instead. And there was a really great guy named Greg Vizza who owned and designed and built this beautiful mixed magazine looking studio in Pittsburgh, a multi-room facility that was just the biggest room in town. And I said, hey, I'd like to sweep your floors. And he said, well, I need an engineer. And I said, I could do that. And just because I didn't know what I didn't know. And
right.
And this guy took me under his wing. And 30 years later, I thanked him on stage at the Grammys in Los Angeles, because I told him I would as a kid.
That is an awesome. So the universe was in fact looking out for you.
Can you imagine if I had gotten that? There's that song Unanswered Prayers by Garth Brooks. Could you imagine if I had gotten what I thought I wanted, where my life would be? I've had this storied career that was like totally off book, but the reality was it was another book that I thought my life was this book, but it was actually a page in this other book that as you get older at 50, you look back and you say, all those things that happened they're almost, predestined for you. You just have to live your version of where you're at in that story,
Okay. So let me ask you this. First of all, that is such a good story, man. I love stories like that. And that's what I love about doing this show, because there's a lot of them if you really look into it. But after that, and man, kudos to your dad, the steel worker, for saying, just get your ass out there and do something, get next to those people and something will happen. What genius in that, right?
Well, it goes to show you that if you just show up enough times, someone else was talking to me and I said, if I had just stayed home 60 days in a 30-year career, my name wouldn't be on any record that anyone gives a hoot about, right? So you don't get to choose the days.
Yeah, right.
You just got to show up every day, and you got to do your thing. That's why you can't say, hey, I'm going to make $1 million. The guys in McCartney's band get $1 million on retainer a year.
Right.
You can't just there are no big breaks. That's the other thing I learned. Your big break is showing up every day. And then every once in a while, a couple slip by the goalie and you have something that you can build off of and go to a different city and start working. And, it's just interesting. I used to get so stressed about decisions and worried about making the right decisions as a young kid that it gave me great peace as I started to have a life unfold in front of me that, I just need to be the best version of myself all the time.
Yeah.
And then pivot when I need to pivot,
And I think you said something else that I know I have found a lot of peace and comfort in is you said just show up and do the work. And a buddy, I was talking about this 6 to 8 months ago only. And he said, Craig, don't be attached. Don't be part of the results committee. And I said, shit, man. And that automatically clicked. And I had really been working on that, but I couldn't conceptualize it that crystal clear. And that has been such a huge thing for me, man. Like just not emotionally attached, just do the work. Cause I can't control that. I can control this showing up every day. Yeah.
What can you control in your career? It's just be on time, be great,
be on time. Yeah.
be what the room isn't, you know? So like me, I became this dude that could do a lot of things. Some of the credits you mentioned were just one day in my life.
Right.
You know, it's like the Indigo Girls, I mastered a record for them. I'm not a mastering engineer, but an opportunity came. I knew enough about it. I mastered a lot of records, but I'm not a mastering engineer.
Sure.
Right? Scale, be what the room isn't. You know, if you don't want to be sitting on your couch, the last thing I wanted to be was sitting on my couch because I felt guilty if I turned down a gig and then I was like waiting for the next gig. You know, I felt like that's on me. So when I was coming up, I took all the gigs. And those gigs led to other gigs. And soon I was able to say, I can't really do that. I can't work for that rate, or the schedule doesn't work. But I to this day, I don't ever say no. I say yes, and I just make the rate accordingly if I don't want to do it. And then, and then if I'm doing it, I can't talk about the project because I had to sign a non-disclosure. But someone asked me to do a single with this artist. And I said it was going to be $100,000 for the song.
Right.
For me to participate in it because I didn't want to do it.
Right.
And I knew it was going to be a heartache. But the steelworker's son in me said, don't say no.
Right.
I will do that record for $100,000. That's one song for $100,000. I will do it. To me, not like record budget. To me.
Yeah. To you.
I'll do that. And then while I'm doing it, I won't be miserable because I know I'm making $100,000 and I'll be able to put that into a creative thing I'm doing forward or whatnot. So,
yeah, man, I call that an asshole tax. I always say I'm doing it, but I'm charging you the asshole tax. You know, I mean, I tell them that, but that's what I call it.
Sometimes they aren't assholes. They're just going to be a heartache. Some records are heartaches. Everything great I've ever done feels like you're birthing a child, whether it's writing a song or producing a record. If it's going to be truly special, you're going to have to do this thing that is like, it's painful to pass. It's just going to take every bit of
stone. You're talking about like it's a kidney stone. It's painful to pass.
It's going to take its toll on you. You know, you're not going to be as strong for a while afterwards if it's worthy, because it takes you to put your whole heart and soul into it.
Yeah, man,
to be truly great. So I want to dedicate, you know, I've got a mission statement that's like, be a part of records that are better than me, right? And to be an essential part of making those records. That one mission statement for me, I can't, and it's also to provide for my family in the music business. So between those 3 points, I can make a decision on every record or every project or every song I'm a part of.
Yeah, for sure, man. So let me ask you this, because I read what you just said. I read an article about you that, you know, the steelworker's son in you is like, man, I don't want to say no. And then you just mentioned, I don't like sitting around doing nothing. Haven't you found to some extent, though, as far as not being willing to sit around doing nothing, haven't you found this a bit of a blessing and a curse?
I don't think it's a curse at all. If something's truly not going to fit into that mission statement, I'll feel okay with not doing it. But I always tell my guys at the school, I always tell them, if you lack inspiration, just move. It's like a fish. You need to get water over the gills. If you feel like you don't have it in you that day and you're bouncing around on the same 4 chords up on the end of the neck, pick up a high-strung guitar, pick up a bass, go to the computer. You need new information coming at you to then have an opinion about. So I think that the perpetual movement is what keeps you going. As soon as you stop, nature takes over, right? And you end up sort of growing hair and getting lethargic. So you got to keep moving. As long as you've got something coming in, you can have an opinion and then create from that. So no, I don't think that you have to know what it is you will and won't do. I was starting to do a lot of stuff in the urban world. You know, I started doing some records, and I did a Tyrese single, and I did a 702 single for the Stuart Little soundtrack in New York. And these producers started using me nonstop. And I was just like, this is not me. This is not what I'm supposed to be doing. Every second I'm on this record, I can't be on the record I'm supposed to be on.
Right.
So I bowed out, and I feel good with that. You know, otherwise I'd be looking at a very different career.
No, I meant as far as I don't know about you, but I'm like that, and I've struggled, and I'm trying not to be. I've been saying this 15 years, 20 years, to slow down, not slow down, just breathe a little bit, you know. And when you're so, sometimes for me, when you're so preoccupied with getting shit done, it's hard to do that.
That's true. And I come home at night. I end my day at 5. and my studio's on my property. I don't fly around the world anymore to make records. If people want to make records, they come to me, and people love coming to Nashville. So thankfully,
Sure.
that's a good thing. I try to make sure that my family life is good. I take the weekends off,
Okay, good.
unless I can't. When I started, I was in Hamburg, Germany for 45 days making a record, and that was just, I couldn't sustain that. That's just not who I am. I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
So I tried to put some general rules where it's like, I'm not going to let it supersede my personal life. I've got to keep that intact because I need that to do the music. And Nashville was such a great town that you can actually do a bit more of that. New York, I couldn't do that. You'd get in a car and go up the Parkway and end up in some Hudson Valley studio making a record for 2 weeks at least, you know? And that was, I don't know that I could continue doing that. But Nashville, it's so busy and structured that you can do that. You can write every day and you do so much more work. You're so much more prolific than you would have been in New York, but you can then say, hey, I'll see you on Monday.
Sounds like you got some good like governors in place to make sure you're like you said, you're done at 5, whatever.
So I mixed a Cash Money Millionaires HBO concert when I was in New York City, and ended up being a Billboard Gold DVD or whatever it was, very successful show. And they had a bunch of really big artists in Cash Money that went on to have solo careers like Ludacris and a bunch of guys. I believe he was in that band, but there's a bunch of guys like that. That one concert, I worked 51 and a half hours straight mixing that project.
Oh, that's a lot, man.
I had the longest session on record at this post-production facility. Some editor came in, one of the owners, and said, I owe you a steak. I had 48 hours of my longest session. Those days are behind me.
Yeah.
I don't do 50. It was 52 hours, not of like chilling. It was where you were sitting there
in front of detail. That's a lot. It's pretty intense.
52 hours straight. And they kept coming into the control room and saying, good news. We're going to lease a helicopter and take it to JFK. There's another flight to get it to air on HBO. I guess it was airing out of the West Coast, and they'd come in later. Hey, good news. We're going to send it courier via this thing. And I was out of it by the end of it. But, those are the good things. I look back on those days of being young and doing those records. That I love them. They're a great part of being able to tell these stories like this. But that's not for me now. That's just not where I'm at.
No, I hear you, man. 100%.
I couldn't do it.
So what made you move to the city?
So I was in Pittsburgh. I'd finally gotten to the point where I was competent. This guy was so patient with me. I would guess out of 1,000 mentors, I would have been fired by the rest of them. This guy was extraordinarily patient. And once I got competent, I started to get good. And then I started to be one of the few guys in Pittsburgh, which is a secondary market, that if you're making a record, you should be making it maybe with this guy. I was one of those on that list and making records that were getting noticed. And I had done this band called High Voltage, which was like the coolest Alice in Chains Saigon kick rock band, which, is my secret passion. I love making those records. I don't get to do a lot of them anymore, but this really big producer named Ron St. Germain, who had done Bad Brains and done the Living Colour record that was so big, and the Stones, he decided that he wanted to steal this band off of me. And I was so honored that this guy wanted to steal this. He heard my record and wanted to steal this band off of me. I was so honored that I asked the manager of the band if I could pick Ron St. Germain up from the airport, where he flew in on his own private twin-engine plane.
Nice.
So I go up to Pittsburgh International Airport and I pick up this guy. And on the way back, I'm just like, I'm this starstruck kid that's saying, hey, man, one day, what if I could be like this dude, right? How amazing is this dude? And he's the one thing I remember, two things I remember. I remember that he felt like he hadn't made it yet, which really for me sunk in and made me think I'm going to really appreciate the success when I do have it. I'm going to just celebrate it as it goes rather than being, I need more. The other thing he said was, you got to leave Pittsburgh. So the next week I moved to New York City, or I planned moved to New York City, not knowing anybody. One of my assistants, Romeo Thomas, went up with me and we got an apartment. Romeo eventually was working with Columbia and Epic, and now it rose through the ranks to, be like the GM of some big labels or director of operations but now he's in a company with Ben Berkman and James Diener. He's a partner with them in a company called Free Solo out of San Francisco. So he became a giant success in the music business. So the two of us were just up there, you know, with machetes going through New York City trying to make it happen.
Where did you first live?
If you come across the Triborough Bridge, as soon as you land on the land there on the other side in Queens, you'll see there's a Dunkin' Donuts right above on the corner. I lived in the apartment above that.
That's so funny. Was it like Astoria or just
Astoria, Queens? Yeah,
right.
On the N train, and we got robbed 4 times in that apartment.
Tuition. That's your tuition for living in New York.
All we had was like VCRs and clock radios. There was nothing to get. So
that's wild, man. So, okay. So you get to New York. How did you get your first gig? Like what started, how did the ball start rolling?
So I was still doing a lot of records out of Pittsburgh because Pittsburgh had this explosion where Rusted Root was happening. The Gathering Field was signed to Atlantic. The Clarks were signed. Brownie Mary, all these, we had 4 or 5 bands, all had major label record deals. So I was still doing a lot of like records from my old life where they would come up and we would go up to the Hudson Valley to like the Clubhouse or Bearsville and make these records.
Yeah.
So I was doing a lot of that as a freelance guy. And then I walked into a studio in New York City. I couldn't really get in and become an assistant at Hit Factory just because I was beyond that.
Yeah.
I couldn't support myself. And I was just, I would have been sitting at a desk. It just wasn't going to work. So this guy had a studio in a rehearsal room called Smash Studios. His name was Clay Sheff. And it was like, it's the most happening rehearsal studio in New York City. And they had this whole floor, and then he bought the floor above him. He had a Trident console in the studio in the end of his rehearsal rooms. And I said, hey, man, you know, let me pick up some work. And he said, oh, I'm so busy. I got all the guys I need. Thanks anyhow. And I said, give me one session. Just give me one. He gave me one, and I ended up being the chief engineer of that place. He built an SSL room on the next floor called Gallery, and I ended up essentially being the guy at these 2 studios, and as well as doing a ton of freelance all over the city with whatever records I could do. But, you know, once I got my foot in the door there, and it was just like, I don't need you. I realized that for every hour I worked, he made $75. Right. So I wasn't a cost center for him.
No, you're a profit center. That's why he hired you. Yeah.
And then it was just a matter of like, oh, how much money do you not want to make by not hiring me? You know, so he never really hired me. I was always freelance there. And I just made a way for myself there. And I used that basically. I did a lot of mixing. That SSL room I was actually exclusively leased. I worked for a production duo called the Berman Brothers, who did a bunch of big dance and pop music. We did Hanson, Mbop, and, you know, Amber, This Is Your Night. We did all those records. And so they had me in this room just mixing records nonstop. And I was the only client in that SSL room for years and making a ton of records. So, yeah, that was my home base, but I was all over New York. New York used to have all these studios like Looking Glass. I don't know what's left. Sorcerer's Sound, Pyramid, all these SSL API rooms, Neve rooms that you can go make records, and you could do it for under $1,000 a day for a day rate. And that was a doable thing back then.
And so you basically took the same formula though, that you went to the guy and say, hey man, let me sweep your floor. You know, I mean, people, it's funny because I tell my kids the same thing now when they're, you know, my kids are older now. And whenever they try to get a new opportunity, I say, and I can't get in the door, I said, tell them you'll work for free. If they're unhappy with the work you do, please don't, and you put it in writing and it's all cool. Or just tell them to give you a shot for free for a week, because not a lot of people are willing to do that, you know, and it's there's nothing to lose almost, you know, if you're halfway competent. That's really good. I think I hope, you know, younger people listening that are looking for opportunities take that to heart.
You have to believe in yourself.
Yeah.
That you've got something that you're like, watch this.
Mm-hmm.
Watch me.
Yeah.
And then it's like, if it's not a cost center to the business, then you're just like, how do you not want to make money?
Right. Yeah. I was just like, give me a shot. Just give me a shot. Yeah.
I do that to this day. People ask me to do records, and I say, you know what? A record company just called me from out of town, and they want to do this artist. And I said, let's not talk about a record. Let's do a song. See if we like each other. Before we spend all this money on getting paper with my lawyer and your lawyer and the artists and, you know, articles of, you know, direction. Let's just see if this is working. And then we'll figure out if we want to do a record together.
Yeah, that's really, it takes so much pressure off, and then everybody's natural. And if it doesn't work, great. You've got no skin in the game. So, you know, you're
not committed to a record. It's good for them. It's good for me. Yeah.
That's great, man. So so how long did you stay in the city for? And did you ever leave the Dunkin' Donuts above the Dunkin' Donuts?
We did. You know, I started dating this beautiful woman who I'm married to for 22 years last week.
Congratulations, right on.
She had a rent-controlled apartment in the city.
Oh, that's why you wanted her, man.
And I can remember,
no matter how good looking she is, she's got a rent-controlled apartment.
I can remember that when she came out to my place in Queens, she cried. So we jumped back in this jitney cab and went to her place. So we had this little alcove studio on 30th and 3rd in Gramercy Park.
Oh, that's a really nice area.
It was incredible. You know, we couldn't both be in the kitchen at the same time or open up the refrigerator and the oven, but it was great. And we were in the city for a decade.
That's great. Well, you got to, it's either space or location, man. You can't have both unless you're super rich.
I don't mind, man. I got a house that's pretty big now, but it's like I'm the kind of person, if I just had one open space, I could live in it. Yeah. No problem.
So what prompted you to move? What was like the final straw in New York?
All right. So I was writing a bunch of songs that were getting used in television. And I was starting to see that, oh, wow, people will actually pay you for your songs that you write, which was like foreign to me because I came up in the rock world where you just like the songs were just part of making records, right? And you were doing this record thing and being a band. But, these songs started to go off and have lives of their own. And I was making, 20, 30 grand a year from TV placements.
Just from licensing.
Yeah. And they would license my demo or my record, my recording of it. And then I get paid for the copyright and the license of the demo. And it's a great thing. But it planted the seed that you could actually make some money. The songs can go out and make money. And you don't have to be there, by the way. My whole life was like every hour I get paid X.
Yeah, you're trading.
For a song, I get paid this, but I'm in the room. So this residual money was highly, it incentivized me to like pursue it. And I just loved doing it anyhow. It was part of my process. And I ended up, at that point, I knew music could be monetized, copyrights. I then got asked to, it's an interesting story. So let me step back one step. There was a rock artist named Chris Grace, and he was an incredible rock artist, like Perfect Circle and Tool. And we were making these records that were just stellar records that were just like so much fun because when you turned them up, you just literally your hair would blow back like the Memorex ad. These were blazing records, like Urge Overkill records.
Chris Grace?
Chris Grace.
I've not heard of him. That's really weird.
Well, he never ended. His dad was the president of BMG Distribution, Pete Jones. And Chris never wanted to go down that road where he could have got a record deal in one day.
Yeah.
But he didn't. That's why he changed his name, and he wanted the music to speak for itself. And so he was this artist who was doing really well, and we were making these great records. Maybe made 4 or 5 things together. Maybe they weren't full records, but this EPs and whatnot. And then he came to me a little bit depressed. I could tell he was heavy, and he was like, "Hey, I got this opportunity to work with Malcolm Byrne, a Grammy Award winning producer, and I think I want to do it." And rather than be upset, I was like, that's awesome, man. And in fact, I lent him a U-47 that I had and a set of V72 Neumann mic pre's tube out of the old EMI valve consoles, these Beatles mic pre's. I lent him for his vocal chain. So he took those and went and made this record with Malcolm Byrne. And he would send me songs along the way. It was a really cool record. And Malcolm mixed the record, and the management and label that was doing it they weren't feeling it. So Chris asked me to mix a couple of the songs, and I did, and Malcolm evidently loved them, and so we did that record together. So I was back in the ether with that. I wasn't producing, but I was mixing the record, and then Malcolm asked me to do a Sparkle Horse record with him, and a Rachel Yamagata record, and then Malcolm said, "Hey, I'm going down to Nashville to make an Emmy Lou Harris record." He had just won a Grammy for her Red Dirt Girl, and then he asked me to go down and make this record with him. Him and Daniel Landwall. Dan Landwall came in for a couple of weeks and worked on the record as well. And so I came to Nashville and I made this record. Spent maybe a month and a half here. So I got to feel what Nashville was all about and get the sense like there was it was a songwriter's town.
Yeah.
The business really is able to stay as robust as it is because the songwriting publishing business that happens, all these studios are able to book time that aren't album dates, their demo dates. So I made this record. When I came home, I just told my wife, who, by the way, was the only one in the household that had a legitimate job with benefits.
All right.
I told her that I told her I wanted to move to Nashville, and she remembers it very differently. This is like a total parting of the stories here, but it ended up leading me to make the dive. She quit her job. We just had a baby. She was going to stay at home, and we moved to Nashville with really not knowing anyone once again. You know, so got to town, and we had sold our house in New York, kind of at the top of the market. We had a house in Cornwall on the Hudson, just north of the city.
Oh, it's pretty there, man.
So we had this little stipend of money, and the week that money ran out, I got my publishing deal. And it was it was so crazy that I was convinced that if we had made half as much money, I would have got a publishing deal twice as fast. You know, it was one of those deals. So we were in Nashville trying to, you know, I was signed to Sony ATV, and, you know, whole new start where it's just like I started to turn down mixing gigs because I just couldn't fit it into my writing schedule. You know, I was full on writing and producing the stuff. I leased RCA Studio C on Music Row. There's a famous studio here that did all the Elvis records. And just the history is, you know, it's museum. In fact, the Studio B is a museum. Studio A is where Dave Cobb is now, but it was Ben Folds' studio. It was the big scoring room with 100-foot ceilings, and it looks like you could fit a whole orchestra in it. And I had what was Chet Atkins' old room, which was a smaller production space on the other side of the building. And I was just hunkered down there, writing every day, mixing, making records. I had turned down a ton of really lucrative mixing gigs because I just couldn't be distracted, which was very difficult for a guy like me. But 3 years into it, I had my first number one as a songwriter and a producer. So,
okay, go back to that. How did you know it was the right thing to do to turn down those gigs?
I couldn't physically do it. I wasn't able to be in my publishing contract and be as plugged in as I needed to be, because you had to be all in on that.
Yeah.
And the mixing gigs, while they were lucrative, I was getting between, if I was working for $1,500 a mix, I was getting points on the record.
Okay. So
it was like $2,000, $2,500, maybe $3,000 occasionally to mix these records. And I had them back to back to back. So I was doing a lot of records, but I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do that. I had to do the songwriting thing. At least I wouldn't have done it in any way that would have been productive to either of them. So I just had to make the decision to do it.
What led you? What was your decision-making process where like your heart or your head or both said, I need to stay with this?
Well, the other thing you got to consider is when you're making decisions in the music business, you can continually get an opportunity put in front of you that's going to take you off your path. Like me doing hip hop and urban music.
Yeah.
Or me going and doing a bunch of boy bands and pop songs because I had a record. I did the Moffats record that sold 6 million copies.
That's
right?
Cool.
So I could be locked up in a studio doing boy bands, you know, but it just wasn't why I got into the music business. And being wired the way I was just always pursuing what it is I felt I was called to do, what I enjoyed doing. If I was doing boy bands, I'd want to pull my hair out after one or two of those records.
Sure.
So it was just, it was risky, but I could see that if I was unmotivated by it creatively, well, then I was going to phone it in and it wasn't going to be anywhere near as good as it would need to be to show up on anyone's radar. So that was my decision. It was risky, but it worked for me.
So it was this, you felt that you had that calling, as you said, that was what kept you in on that. It was like, I know this is my function, my purpose.
You can't get distracted.
Yeah.
You got to look at opportunities for what they are. I will take $100,000 record as long as I know I'm off of it in 3 months.
Yeah.
I can hold my breath a certain amount of time. And I don't want to just take that money and have a smash and grab. I want to be the best version. I'll walk off a record if I don't feel like I'm the right person. People will call me and ask me to do a record, and I'll say, you know, my buddy would actually be better for this record than me. You know, and so I try to keep that. You know, when I was young, I just needed to work, and I was an hourly guy. But when I started getting into like, you bid the job, and they're saying, hey, we'll give you X to do this, and a production stipend, and you know, this much to mix it. When I started to get to the residual stuff and the bigger budget stuff, I started to figure out that I could only really be great if I was all in on it.
Sure.
I wasn't going to be the guy for everything.
And you had the discipline to delay gratification because you had the intensity behind it to know that I'm going to make this shit happen.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to go out and work on the Metallica record early on as a Pro Tools operator. And I thought, man, that's a big record, you know? And I didn't do it because I just knew that I didn't want to be a Pro Tools operator.
Yeah.
It wasn't where I needed to be. And I'd be, for every second you're on a record that you shouldn't be on, that's a second you're not on the right record. It's the way I looked at it.
Yeah.
So
Opportunity cost.
For good or for bad, you got to gamble on yourself.
Did you always have the mindset of, this is what I want to do? In other words, did you always have the mindset of, I'm going to do as a career things I want, things that bring me joy, for lack of better?
Well, here's the other benefit from being raised in a poor family is that what's the worst that's going to happen? You'll be poor.
Right.
I knew how to survive as a poor person, right? So for me, it was always like, I'm not going to get into that fear-based where I have to have a car payment that's $500 a month. I'm not going to have that stuff. I can always go back to staying at someone's couch before I had a family, you know, and I don't know if it's self-driven or if it's the universe, but when I got married, I made more money. When I had a baby, I made more money. When I bought a house, I made more money. You know, these things tend to happen for the right reasons. I got to support that stuff and make the right decisions, but I was never afraid of bouncing back to slumming it. You know, what's happiness? I don't want to drive a BMW if it comes along with a bunch of baggage where it's like your day to day is a heartache. So,
no, but what's pretty cool and what is different is when you are raised in a poor environment, because I was, and I did not get this message, but you did. And this is what I'm really like, wow. That somehow you had in your head, oh, I can do a career. I could do things that make me happy. That's not very usual for people that come from that demographic.
I don't think I ever looked at it past maybe a year. Like, can I do this for another year was always my motto. Can I keep it going? Is there a marketplace for me to be of value where I could pay my bills for the next year? It was only after I started having hits and the money kept coming like every quarter and bigger money came that allowed me to not look at my bank account at the end of every month. You know, it's like I knew I was covered, that I knew I was in it for the long haul. For me, it was always like, oh, I might end up working at the post office. Who knows?
Okay. So it was a hustle that happened to work and you just had it in your head. Okay, I'm okay here. I'm doing well. Will I like this for another year or can I make this continue to go? And if I can, I'll stick it out.
Yeah, not even like it. I loved it. You know, it's what I wanted to do, but it was like, will they allow me to do it? Will it be financially irresponsible for me? Will I live on the streets if I do this? It's like, how do I stay in it another year? That probably stopped whenever I started having big mixing contracts where I would get paid, you know, a couple of grand to mix a song, you know, and you're doing more than one a day. You're starting on another one in the middle of the day. You put 3 records together. Next thing you know, you got 60, 80 grand coming in, you know?
Sure.
So that's whenever I got a little breathing room. But before that, and then I thought of it more like, oh, I'm kind of in this now. I'm not the guy that's participating in the pickup game of basketball. I'm signed to a team.
Right.
I've got a little runway in front of me.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing that. That's really cool. Okay, so I think I have these facts right. Your first #1 song with Jimmy Wayne, Do You Believe Me Now? You wrote it, you mixed it, you produced it, and you played most of the instruments on there. Is that correct? I just want to make sure my facts are okay. So this thing, once it explodes, like what's going through your head as far as like anything musically, career-wise, anything, personality-wise, family-wise, and how did that, if it changed, how did that change your outlook on any of these things?
Well, that was my first #1 as a songwriter.
Right.
I had stuff that was, you know, big records prior to that I had worked on, but I didn't own content, you know, that I own. People think you sell your songs, you know, they say, hey, you don't want to sell my songs like you do. And it's like, well, I never sell them. You know, I get paid every night that Toby Keith or Keith Urban plays my songs. I still get paid when they play on the radio. It's still, I own those. We license them to them. So when the first one happened, Jimmy was in a record deal with Big Machine Records. They had a record finished with him. And they were ready. They had picked a single and they were ready to put him out and put him to radio. He had another record that had 3 top 10s. He had a number 3 top 5s on the last record and one that was maybe a top 10. And this record was, I got to write with him after that. We didn't write anything, but when he left, I said, let me play you this song. And I played him Do You Believe Me Now? I wrote that with Tim Johnson and Dave Pahanish. And he loved the song. And then he said, let me put my vocal on that. And we did. And he kept it on the down low because he was really nervous about his position at the label at that point. He eventually played it for the label, and they kind of blew their doors off. It was very unlike what was happening in town. You know, they were doing all these linear, not track built sessions, but sessions that were 7 guys playing at the same time, you know, the country records.
Yeah.
And this was kind of out of left field, kind of like Vertical Horizon, you know, just a lot of hooks. And it was track built because we didn't have the budget to do it any other way, you know? So, but it had a real special thing because it was track built. And track built being, you know, I'm sitting there, I play B3, I play bass, I play guitars. Next thing you know, you got a song, you know, that's what track built is. And then that ended up.
Did you read my mind on that? Because I was just about to ask you. I was just going to say, can you just clarify track build? And he said track build. I'm wondering, like, I remember when I was a little kid, my parents would say, "Oh man, you're really tired. It says that on your forehead." Did it say that on my forehead?
Well, there's certain things, nomenclature.
That perplexed look.
There's certain nomenclature they use in Nashville that doesn't. It's not other places. Like a record is a song in Nashville, one song. Hey, I made that record with him, and it was like one single. It's a record. It's like a 45 record, you know.
Yeah.
And one of those things is track built versus like a linear built song or a full band tracking, you know. And the track built thing was something that I had done in New York nonstop, just because that's the way we made music, and it's the way that Jimmy Wayne's single came out. After the label heard it, they called him a half hour after he played it for them, and they said, "This is your new single." And the whole radio promotions department was on speakerphone with him clapping for him. And so we secretly went in and recorded a whole record without the record company knowing, me and Jimmy. And this record that they had, he just went to them and said, "Look, this record sounds so different, the one that we have, this single, that it doesn't fit in." Mark Bright, who's a big producer here in Nashville, and Nathan Chapman, who did all the Taylor Swift stuff, had done the other half of the record. And he said, it just doesn't fit in. So they ended up releasing a whole record that I had done with them. And that song went on to be 3-week Billboard #1 and second biggest song of the year. So it was huge, and I didn't know what to expect because I hadn't had that. You know, you think it's going to be a certain way, and a lot of those things came true. But the one thing Jimmy instilled in me was, he's like, "Hey man," I had this little half fridge in my studio, and he would come in. It was a stainless steel fridge, and he would take a Sharpie and say, number 65 on the country charts, and the date 64, and all the way down to #1, right?
That's
but
cool, man.
He would say, "Hey, it's number 12 this week. Go take your wife out for dinner. You know, celebrate it."
Right.
And so I did do that on a personal level. I can remember the day I got the call on a Friday that it was going to go #1 on Monday, because they know that, you know, and I was driving, and I remember I was driving into Nashville. I remember thinking, man, when I die, they'll say, he once had a #1 with Jimmy Wayne. You know, it was one of those things. So
isn't it weird how guys always think that, like, women never sit there and think, "Oh, when I die, that's a guy thing," you know? Like, my wife has never done anything remotely like that, but I have.
It's so wrapped up in our purpose, right? It's like, if you do it at that point, I had been writing songs forever, but it was like half of me felt irresponsible for doing it, right? And I felt like, what am I doing here to my wife and my little baby? Is this something? Am I just allowing myself this thing? And maybe I'm not any good. I think I'm good. Maybe I'm not any good. And that was just like, hey, you're doing the right thing. You are good. Yeah. Guess what? It's the biggest song in the country. So that was more of a vindication maybe than it was. The celebration was like, it took a big weight off my shoulders, saying, you know what? The universe is telling you you're doing it right. You're doing what you should be doing. Keep on doing it. And then the hits just kept coming after that. You know, the next year I had a #1 with what's his name? Toby Keith. And the year after that, I had a #1 with Keith. And the year after that, I had the Tim McGraw stuff. So, you know, it was really reinforcing the sanity that I wasn't doing the wrong thing by my family. At a certain point, I had obligations. I needed to make sure I was spending my time in a way that wasn't just self-gratifying.
All right. So thank you, man. That was very, very cool. Two questions from that. The first is, you mentioned the universe several times. Were you always someone that trusted the universe?
No, you learn to trust it, right? You learn that the first time you walk into the ocean, you learn that you're not going to be swept out to sea. You don't know that until you do it, right?
Right.
And of course, it's the first time you get to see the ocean, too, which is like
Mhm.
no one can explain that to you. So
Yeah.
it's a learned behavior, and you slowly get more secure in what it is you're doing. You trudge out a little bit further into the waves until you're out in the surf. And so you learn to trust it. And I learned most of that by looking back and saying, you know what, I'm not going to worry about this because I've been here before. I can get out of the woods. I know where I'm
Okay.
at. I have a compass built off of experience. And then you start to realize and attribute it to the universe, but it really is just like, oh, this is doable. I'm where I should be. I'm doing the right thing. I can move forward. I know I've been here before and I can navigate it. And when you look back, it looks a lot like predestination, like the book's already been written, but it
Right.
really just builds you of what you're able to maybe do. It's just like building the Empire State Building. You're slowly building another layer on top of the substruct that you have.
I actually believe you write your own book. You write your own ending, your own story, if you want to do that, you know. The second question I wanted to ask you is, how the hell did you even get into country music? It's hilarious. Like, I know you weren't listening to it. Like, they don't even allow, I don't even think they have country music in New York City.
Here's the beautiful thing about that. Country music isn't Kenny Rogers. It's not
Right.
Scruggs and Flats. It's if you look at the history of country music, it's recreated itself. I moved to Nashville, and the biggest catalyst for me coming was that Keith Urban was putting records out, and I felt like Keith Urban could have been part of the Eagles.
Yeah, so
right?
it's contemporary. Yeah,
It is. I mean, you watch Tom Bukovac, you watch Jerry McPherson.
Yeah,
You watch it. These guys were all closet rockers.
yeah, for sure.
They grew up on Joe Walsh in every record, the Beatles records. So everybody running the country music business they're all rockers, from the 70s. So that's really what country is now. When the Eagles did release that record years ago, they released it in the country market. That's just where they're at now. That's where the music is. So I felt like it wasn't a swing for me. It was the music I was already writing, which was 70s rock.
Yeah, at the time you came through. If you had come 20 years earlier, it would have been a problem. But yeah,
it would have been. I wouldn't have been successful. And I don't know that the bro country thing is, it's not my thing. There's things that I like, but it's just not. It's not.
Call it the bro country thing.
Well, they've got a new one called Boyfriend Country now. It's like Dan and Shay, all that, like, sort of. I could probably be more into the Dan and Shay movement than I am the bro country. I just wrote at my barn the other day with a couple of guys that are into the pop country thing, and it was just like, that's not why I'm here. I can do it, but I'm not going to spend too much of my time doing it.
We went to a show. I'm not going to say who it was, but a while back, my wife and I, and it was kind of like bro country. And she's from the UK, and I mean, we've been together 28 years, and she's been here a long time. But in her very innocent way, she said, "Craig, this is like cowboy disco, right?" I said, "Yes, it's exactly what it's like, And it was.
And who knows what it becomes next? But it usually has a cycle of about 10 years.
Yeah.
And you'll run the gamut all the way through it. And there'll still be people like Garth Brooks putting out songs, and I think Miranda Lambert she doesn't give a crap about the trends. She's writing really cool music. A lot of the girls in country are really writing some really great stuff that's just great pieces of music.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are just doing that center of the sun thing where it's like they're just pounding on the same old drum.
Yeah.
And I guess that is what it is.
I actually think Amy Ray is a great songwriter, man.
Oh,
she's a very talented woman. Hey, so I'm going to ask you about some of the folks you've worked with. If you could talk about how the gig came together, and then maybe a cool or interesting or funny or not so funny story about working with them. Let's start with Indigo Girls.
So the Indigo Girls was part of, Chris Grace was working with a Universal company, and they had these live records that needed mastered. And it was Steve Earle, the Indigo Girls, not the Delaney's, the Irish rock band.
Coors?
No. there was 4 or 5 records I mastered, and I literally spent a day on each of them. So there's not really much of a story. A lot of people say, hey, what about that Justin Timberlake thing you did? And I mixed a radio version for Senorita, but it was one day.
Yeah. Okay.
And it was like, I came in, I did it. It went off. I did a Shakira single. I did Wherever, Whatever, Whenever, her first big hit. I did a radio single for that. That was like a Hot 100 version. And, I don't usually meet them if I'm mixing. People, they'll look down the discography and it's really, there's not a big story on a lot of these pop things just because they happen in a day. Like a mastering engineer, they come in and they're out.
When you're mixing, so you'll meet artists when you're mixing when it's a band though, or when it's not a pop artist, when it
depends. Like Dropping Daylight was a band on A&M Records. Yeah, I had done, Flyleaf?
No.
Rock band out of Texas, big record. I had mixed their first record for A&M. It was very well received. And then they went to work with a big rock producer. And I got onto that record as well as a producer and mixed some stuff on it. And I have met them because I've tracked and produced records with them. But Dropping Daylight was like an Incubus meets Ben Folds 5, piano-based, really heavy rock band from Minneapolis. Incredible.
That sounds great. What are they called? That sounds great.
Dropping Daylight. Incredible band. And they were a band I never met. I don't think I ever met those guys, but I mixed, I think, all the singles on that record. So a lot of times things come in via FedEx in the old days or via the internet today. I mix it. I don't meet anybody. David Bendeth had produced the record, and David Bendeth was a big rock producer out of New York and had done Breaking Benjamin and a bunch of records, and I never met David either. So a lot of these records, I'm just in and out.
But when you mix, doesn't somebody like from the hey man, I like the mix, or maybe change this?
No. Usually what happens is that, like for instance, the Dropping Daylight record, I had a vacation booked, which for me at that age was critical. Like missing your vacation is like someone telling you got summer school.
Yeah.
And the label reached out to me and said, hey, would you spec mix this single? We were going out. David Bendeth mixed it. Sean O'Keefe, punk rock guy from Chicago, mixed it. And Nick Rascaleras from the Sound City documentary mixed it. Mixed it on an 80 series Neve, mixed it on a Neve VR, mixed it on an SSL. I said, well, I'm going to cancel my vacation, so I'll mix all 3 of the songs. I'm just going to mix them because I'm taking the time off anyhow. Right. I mixed them. I had leased, when I first came to Nashville, I leased a little ISO booth in somebody else's studio. And I mixed those 3 songs on a Mix Plus system, an old Pro Tools system, just in an ISO booth. And ended up beating out those guys, so a lot of it comes in just sort of like spec mixes, send it out. And if you get chosen, they're going to pay you your rate. So you do it for free, and then they pay you the $2,000 or whatever you charge.
Oh, dude, that's awesome.
But very rarely is somebody in the room. Sometimes there is, but very rarely. When you get more and more mixes and people start to come to you as a mixer, a lot of times it's just like, hey, we want you to mix it. You mix it, and then there's a revision process remotely, which is much better. Because these people don't know my monitors. They don't know my studio. They're sitting on a couch, usually behind me. They're interrupting, and it's the best version is like I say, hey, take it and listen to it where you listen to music. Listen on your headphones, listen in your car. If you have a stereo you listen on, and then give me a punch list, like number them. And make sure that the bass player talks to the lead singer before I get it back, so the bass player doesn't say raise the bass, and the lead singer says turn the bass down. Very calculated process. And most of the time I was dealing with A&R guys, so the band was usually a step removed, and I would get notes through the A&R or maybe directly, but it's a very solitary process, which can be, you can build a system where you're really effective. You get a band in there and forget about it.
Yeah, I can understand that. That's funny, a punch list. For anybody who doesn't know what a punch list is, it's like when you have contracting or workers in your house and, you go through, you do your inspection and say, hey, man, you need to fix the crown molding over here. It's
Number 1, bring the vocal up. Number 2, less background vocals. Number 3, turn the guitars up, make them more bitey. Number 4, the snare drum, put this on it, And that's, then you just go back and forth once or twice and you're done.
The Cramps, how the hell did they fit into this mix? This is awesome.
I don't even remember that. When you said it, I'm wondering what that is. It's on my discography?
Yeah.
Can you read me what it says?
Yeah, man. Hang on one second, because I'm pretty sure I got that off All Music. Give me 1 second. And there was a couple on there that I almost was sure were not correct, but I was hoping this was, because I'm not like a diehard crazy.
Where are they from?
The Cramps are like from the city, I think. Hang on a second.
There's records that you do that you're really, really entrenched on, and you're part of the whole creative process. And there's records where you come on and you do the tracking date for one day. You get them set up, and then they go on their own and do the rest of the tracking. Like at my barn, Mercy Me, a big Christian band, just recorded their last record at my barn. It was nominated for a Grammy. I went down there the first day, got them sounds, and then David Garcia, the producer, was running Pro Tools. So I went up and smoked a cigar on my porch. And then the next day I went down and got sounds again, just made sure everything was turned on. And then I went up and sat on my porch. Occasionally some of the band would come up to play with they bring their kids to play with my German Shepherd. And the third day I went to Florida. So they were in my studio working for a week without me. So sometimes I'm on records like that as well.
Okay, this is on your website. It's Universal Buzz mastered live concert for you. So you mastered that.
Yeah, that was part of that. I probably mastered 5 records for them. That was all through Chris Grace. It's another funny thing. People think, band, I'm in demand. The Cramps want to work with me. Chris had these records that he'd mastered, and I was a guy that he trusted. So I mastered the Indigo Girls, Steve Earle, the Cramps, 2 others that I can't remember. One of them was this Irish
they're from Sacramento, by the way, not from the city. Let me see. Let me go on your. This is mastering. Let's see here. Badly Drawn Boy.
Yeah.
Dropkick Murphys.
Dropkick Murphys. That's what I was trying to think.
Yeah, that's it.
These are all records that they were live records, and they were done in 5 hours for me as a mastering guy. And it's like, if you love that band, you think there's a great story there, but the reality is like Warren Zevon, on his record, listed, credited.
Yeah.
That's the record that won the Grammy. And it's like, I spent one day doing a duet with him and Emmy Lou Harris.
Did you get to work with him?
No, he was very sick at this point.
Yeah, I was wondering.
They sent files to us in Nashville, and we did Emmy's vocal and shipped it out, and it got mixed. So my role in that is fairly insignificant, other than being credited. There's other records that are monumental for me that I wasn't even credited on. That's just the way it goes.
Talk about a couple of those that you really liked the record. I'm not looking to get controversy or anything like you weren't credited, but just any project that you have. Talk about a couple of projects that you really liked.
I'm trying to think of a good one. Like the Mercy Me record. That record was nominated for a Grammy, recorded in my barn. I don't think I'm credited on that record, but the first day I was the tracking engineer, got all the sounds up, and then handed it off to David, who was sort of the producer and Pro Tools operator. But I'm not even credited on that record, other than the studio being credited. And no big deal. I want to help those guys. I like them. They live down the road. They're good dudes. And, I don't really dwell on stuff like that, but I'm sure there's just so many times where, you can either get angry, but I have the world's best music business story.
Okay, tell me.
There's an artist in Nashville. I was supposed to go out to Los Angeles to write with Keith Urban. Nicole was making a movie. He was stationed out there. So, as it often happens when you get these bus calls where they're like, hey, you're going to go out on the road for the weekend with this band and write with them in between their shows. They always get canceled last minute, or there's it just happens all the time. So my date to LA got canceled with Keith. So I had started 2 or 3 things that I just loved, and I was like, okay,
song-wise.
See if he likes any of these, right? Okay. And that way we'll have a jumping off point, right? You're right with Keith. You don't want to waste his time being uninspired on his bus, right?
Yeah.
So I was writing at Starstruck, which is Reba's studio, Reba McEntire's studio in Nashville, big, beautiful studio. I was writing in one of the writing rooms there, and in comes this artist signed to Big Machine Records, who had won or came in second on a TV show, and it was just a bust of a day. We were not getting anywhere. Very little synergy between the two of us. Not his fault, not my fault. Very rare that it happens, but it happened that day. But he sounded just like Keith, and he had a record deal. And I thought to myself, well, maybe I'll play this song for him. It's finished at this point. I finished the song. So I play him this song. He loves it. I bring him into the studio. I track it like a full record because I had already had the #1 with Big Machine and Jimmy Wayne. I thought, hey man, let's do this again. Same thing. And so I cut this thing to the teeth. It sounds like a massive rock record, big, happy summer song. And put his vocal on it, had to push the living daylights out of him, really unique phrasing and really reaching for him. The range of it was big, but we got a great vocal on him. And I sent it to him and he's like, oh my God, I love it. It's fantastic. And calls me back the next week and says, hey, I lost my record deal. So, hey, I feel for him. It's one song for me. It's his career for him, right? So I said, oh, man, I'm sorry. And I get it. No problem. A year later, he sends me an email saying, hey, that song that we wrote, I entered into a songwriting competition. And I was like, what? Because he didn't really write the song. I'd put him on as co-writer because I'm more than happy to do that. You know, that song was already finished whenever I brought it in. But I brought him on because he was going to do it as a single and the record company was going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars pushing it up the chart, share the intellectual property. I have no problem with that. But it felt weird that he had submitted in a songwriting competition. I figured he'd want to submit one of his songs that he actually had.
Or at least pick up the phone and say, hey, by the way, remember that song we worked on? I mean, that would be common sense. Are you cool if, whatever. But to unilaterally do it, that was kind of weird. I'm
pretty easy breezy about that stuff. Whatever.
Right.
And keep in mind, he had been selling the song on iTunes at this point. Right. So he's selling the song with the demo we had recorded. The way the publishing world works is to record that demo costs about $800, right?
Yeah.
Session players and studio time. They split that in the copyright. So since we were 50-50 on the copyright, I owed $400, he owed $400. I was getting calls from Sony saying, hey, this guy didn't pay his demo bill. And I was like, it happens. And then I start seeing that he's selling the song, or I heard that he was selling the song on iTunes, which you're not supposed to do with a demo because that's supposed to be kept in the industry. It is what it is. He calls me and tells me that he submitted it to this Guitar Center competition that had 10,000 entries, and it won, right? And guess who the judge was? Keith Urban. So Keith Urban,
my God,
picks this song that I had written for him. I just had the number one with Keith. And this guy, and I was like, oh, that's great. And I was like, I was just kind of stunned and confused about it because it just felt like, there's like a big part of this conversation that's not happening.
Yeah.
So part of it was like he won X amount in prizes and cash and gear. And I thought, well, maybe he'll give me an Epiphone guitar or something. Who knows?
Sure.
And this is the music business. I'm fine with all of it.
Yeah.
So part of his prizes was that he got to go into the studio and cut a record with Keith Urban and Dan Huff.
Oh my God.
So they cut the record.
Oh my God.
So Keith is playing and singing on my song that I had written for him. That wins this competition that he picked out of 10,000 songs, right? And then they decide they're going to make it the single off of the record. Right? And part of that was that iTunes was going to give it away as the free download of the week. I guess, I don't know if they still do it, but they had, at the point they were giving away free downloads of the week. But that's an issue for publishers because the copyright, you have to ask the label, you have to ask the publisher for a gratis copyright, a free copyright saying it's for promotion.
Yeah.
They never asked for the gratis copyright.
Were you even listed as the co-writer on that?
I'm not sure. I don't know that I ever saw a liner note on it, but they never asked for the license. They never paid for the hundreds of thousands of downloads, what I imagine it was, because that's kind of what they were getting on those free downloads. And here we are 2 years later, and I haven't even been paid the demo bill for that song.
You had to cover his demo bill.
Very little. I did have to cover it because it's part of my publishing contract. I recouped that stuff. It was just one of those stories that I was as it was unfolding, I was actually like, this is the greatest. It's like that 50-hour session. It almost became like worth it because the story was just such a good example of all the places, all the pinch points in the music business where you can just get uncredited. I remember after it was being released, I searched it in Google with parentheses around my name and his name and the song title. And they had done a bunch of press, like the Associated Press, where they'll just take press releases and you'll see them in a bunch of articles. And one of them was, it got down and said the artist's name, wrote the song with, and I thought, here it comes. He's going to mention me. And he said, the artist, unnamed, wrote the song with Keith Urban in mind. And that was
my
it.
God. Dude, do you want to out him right here?
Well, it's just funny, you know, and it's like you got to let it roll off your back. I like the story because it's such a, there was a million parts. I tell people Hitler would have paid that demo bill. At a certain point, how do you have all this goodness come in your life and you don't at least pay the demo bill for
That
it?
is so just like gross, man. That's
Then I had a songwriter
cheesy.
friend who signed this artist to a publishing deal after that, and he asked me to write with the artist, and the artist called me to write again.
The same dude had the balls to call you to what was your conversation with him like?
I don't think I returned the email.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into that. You know, it's
no,
like,
you know what? I don't ever fight, man. A delete
we always
is
have
much
these
easier.
stories, these music business stories. We all have them. I always liken it to that scene in Jerry Maguire where they're at the table having their date, and she said, "Let's not tell each other our sad stories." Right? Everybody in the music business has these stories.
Let's not tell each other.
So
our
I just
sad
don't.
stuff.
I decide not to roll around in them, but I just thought that particular story, and there's no hyperbole in that story. That was my experience with it, and it was like it was an example of at every single junction, the wrong thing was done.
Yeah, that's great. You know what though? I think if you're in any business again, I'll say what I said before. Anytime you're an entrepreneur, you're going to pay tuition like this. Period.
Yeah. Well,
It's
you
just,
know, we had the #1 party for Without You, and Keith was there, was celebrating the songwriters that wrote Without You, me and Dave Panish. And Keith said, "I love that." I almost said the artist's name. He said, "I love that." He said, "I
come on,
love
inside, man. You're going to feel so cleansed if you just come out with it, Joe. Come on."
He said, "I love that song." He said, "I wanted to record that song." And I told him, I said, "You know, so-and-so would love to have a #1 song. That song was written for you."
Does he know the full story?
Oh, no, I never told him. I only tell it not like to get – I would never want to get back at the guy, but I just think that it's like it's a perfect storm of what is wrong with – what can go wrong in the music business. And it was just like at every junction, I got my hat handed to me with that instance. And it was just – it was one of those things that ended up becoming more entertaining as a story to tell. Sure. And over the years, you know, the elephant didn't get any bigger that I shot. You know, this is this story, to my recollection, is exactly how it happened. There's no exaggeration. It didn't grow into this fabled thing. That's what the music business is. And then you'll have an artist like Jimmy Wayne who would go on television and press and on radio, and all he would talk about was me. Yeah. It's, you know, so that you have those two. It's the yin and yang of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's good that, I mean, this stuff happens every day I mean, it's just people are assholes sometimes, and there's nothing you can do about it. You just watch and smile. And
it almost brought me peace that the guy asked me to write again, because I felt like maybe he didn't do it intentionally. Like he had to have thought he didn't do me dirty because he asked me to write again.
No, people like that just have no moral compass, man.
Like it almost made me feel better about it, because it was just like an absence of mind situation, even though if he could see it from my eyes, it would be horrific, right? But it was just what it was.
But that's the problem. People that do stuff like that, they don't see things from other people's eyes. It's like just narcissistically driven, and you know, it's about what's in it for me. And because the thing is, if he would have done the right thing by that, he probably would have had just as much success.
Well, the other thing is,
and maybe even more so, because now he would have had an advocate. You know, a rising tide lifts all boats, right?
You would think, and I can understand. Maybe he didn't want to like shine the light on his co-writer who had just had a #1 with Keith Urban. It might shed the light or focus people's conversation on him. Hey, that other guy wrote that song, you know, which in this particular instance was true, but you know, it would certainly take away from the authenticity of what he was trying to do. So I get that. We're behind the scenes. We make our money quarterly. Yeah. It's okay.
Last chance. You want to out him?
I think I gave enough information that if you did a Google search, you'd probably be able to figure it out.
Oh man, great story. I'm sorry you had to go through that.
It is.
But great.
I think it's my best story. You know, look at me. This is the way to be half glass full. After all these years, like that's one of my best stories. So it's like,
oh man, that's awesome. Top 3 experiences you've had musically.
Musically in the studio or anywhere?
You pick, man. Could be in the studio, could be working with somebody, writing, whatever.
I'll tell you one,
Knee-jerk.
which is the one that comes to mind, and I think it's more because I was young. I used to work in this big studio in Pittsburgh, and WQED was in town, the public television station, and we started doing all the final post-production and layback for the Mr. Rogers Show.
Oh, that's cool.
So those final episodes would come to me, and all the media would get put together, and I'd kind of mix the Mr. Rogers Show. Along with that, we would do certain things that they didn't do on set, like picture. I don't know if you remember picture.
Yeah,
that was
I
something
do.
where they fade into a picture and it'd be a whole other taping. So I would do all the jazz trio stuff with Johnny Costa and Roger Humphreys and these great legendary jazz guys. I do all that. I do all the picture and what is the Land of Make Believe stuff, because that was offset and post produced. The music for it was so. As part of that, I started to do Johnny Costa records, the pianist. And I can remember Johnny was really sick. He had leukemia, but he was such a special player that it was one of my first experiences of being in the room and just wanting to be as quiet as I could be and get out of the way so that he could just be recorded. And he was so sick that was a big part of, like, we had to make sure we got him when he was feeling good. And then you certainly didn't want him sitting there and wearing himself out with sound checks. But I can remember making that record and just thinking, man, whether someone hears this or not, this is one of the great honors. The music was so good and so special. And it was a beautiful recording, but it was just Johnny Costa playing. And, he's such a signature sound to his piano playing that you remember from the Mr. Rogers Show. But that was one that was just like, I'll remember that forever as an audio engineer, being able to be a part of that. The other one would probably be playing the Ryman Auditorium, playing that to a sold out show to people and just having that experience and being on stage and hearing that whole room resonate with a song that you wrote.
Who was that, with Keith or with?
No, we had done a celebration. Songwriter, the guy that I wrote "Do You Believe Me Now" with, was a hit songwriter that died of cancer. And rather than do a benefit, we did this thing called the world's biggest pitching party. When we pitch our songs to people, we go to their offices and play, or we send them an MP3, or we sit them down and say, "What do you think of this for Keith?" Or "What do you think of it for Tim McGraw?" Usually happens in offices, but we decided to honor this guy. We were going to play his 12 best songs. And we were going to do it
man.
in the Ryman Auditorium, and it ended up being a sold-out concert, and it's a beautiful experience. And one of the songs that I had written with him, after he passed, we wrote the song that ended up getting cut, and Vince Gill played on it. It was an artist that was on MCA that he asked Vince to play on it. But this song was written about my friend passing, and it was from the perspective of his wife, what she must be feeling like that day. And people loved that song and started cutting
heavy,
it.
Man.
But we credited him on the song because it was like he was divinely there when we were writing it. It was one of those.
Oh, that's pretty heavy.
So we played that song, just acoustic guitar, and my buddy and me, my co-writer, and you could have heard a pin drop.
Yeah.
And the PA and the room. That room is like, I've played the Opry, like the Opry Mills, where they shoot the TV show, and then the Opry started at the Ryman, and every year they do it at the Ryman for a period. But being in that room and to be on that stage, and then it was just like the sound that night was one of those things. I'll never forget it. And I guess the third, walking up on stage and thanking my wife at the Grammys. And
yeah, that's pretty cool, man.
And Greg Vizza, and those would be the three that instantly come to mind.
Greg was the guy in Pittsburgh who gave you that shot.
Greg Vizza.
Dude, that is your dad still around?
Yeah. My dad's 78.
So he got to see this all. What a thrill that must have been for him.
Yeah. My family's super supportive. And it's certainly, when you win a Grammy, it's like you don't have to put the other stuff in. Like sometimes when you show up on a show like this, they'll go through a long list of records and you're hoping one of those resonate with someone, or like, oh, I know that record, or right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't. But now they could just announce you like, hey, Joe West, he's a Grammy Award winner, and then you walk on stage.
It's like you're covered.
That's been the biggest upside of having a Grammy, actually, other than actually having the little Grammy, which is great, but you can't. It's not very mobile,
Yeah.
it's been the greatest thing because it's just is like it's a mic drop. You know, it's like, hey, today this person's going to be speaking to you.
That's hilarious. It's a mic drop.
It's all you need.
Yeah, man. The Grammy Award winner. So what were some of the low points, Joe, or dark periods you might have had to deal with, and how'd you get through them?
Well, the lowest points would have been when you're struggling for cash, right? And you're sitting there. I remember when I was living in New York, my wife and I sat down and she made a resume for me because I was thinking about getting out of the music business.
Right.
And then, you know, I hit...
Which had to be sad enough to have to think about that.
Well, just thinking like, maybe this is it for me. You know, maybe this isn't going to be enough. And then I hit Command P and printed off 2 copies, and we're sitting across the table from each other. And as I was reading down through my resume, halfway down the resume, I realized that I not only had admitted to my wife, I had put it on paper, printed it out, and handed it to her that there's nothing that I'm good for.
Would you like a lid with that shake?
I can remember reading it, and halfway through it, it's just like it dawned on me that I can't believe I just printed this out and handed it to my wife. And it was like I was stuck in the music business. You know,
Right.
I had no parachute. I had nothing. And, you know, had I had a parachute, you know, maybe I would be working at a General Mail facility right now, or a Costco's. Or
You might be a cost accountant somewhere.
I doubt that. You know, that would be too high to shoot on the list. But yeah, it was one of those moments where you're just searching, and you're like, why is this not working?
Yeah.
What? I'm trying so hard. I'm doing everything that I can do, and it's like it's just not good enough. I'm not good enough. That's what I was left with, and that's got to be the low for every artist. You know, I mean, whether you're on stage and people aren't showing up, whether you're singing your songs and nobody gives a crap, playing them for people, you know, whether you're making records that people don't want to sign or don't want to listen to, you know, at a certain point, you got to stop and say, it's me.
How did you get out of that funk, the I'm not good enough funk?
I think I was good enough, but this is a world where you can't, you know, they actively step over people in Nashville that are geniuses. You know, Chris Stapleton, you know, everyone's like talking about how great he is, but they stepped over Chris Stapleton for 10 years in Nashville. That guy had that voice, writing hit songs and playing out everywhere with that voice, and no one cared for 10 years.
Why was that, you think?
Well, I just think that we're a reactionary culture in business. You know, it's like it's hot as a poker when everyone's got their hand on it, but no one's willing to grab a diamond in the rough and do it. You know, so you've just got to. Attrition is the key. If you feel like you're doing the right thing, that's why you can never do this just for the money, because you will get demoralized and get washed out. You've got to do it. And there are people that are doing it for the money. I say the downturn in the music business is the best thing that ever happened to it, because it's washed out all of the cash cows.
That happens with every recession. Like in the 90s, it wiped out everybody who's going into becoming a financial planner. Right. And then in the mid 2000s, in the mortgage, everybody was becoming a realtor, right, and a mortgage broker, and it flushes all that shit out. Yeah,
it's a good thing.
Yeah, it is a good thing. Actually.
But you just have to, you just got to center yourself and say, hey, we're only here for a short time. How many people do you talk about from 100 years ago? Charlie Chaplin, Tesla, Abraham Lincoln. You know, who would they talk about in 100 years from now? I don't need to be that person. I need to be the person that took the lemons that he was given and made lemonade. I want to be the best version, and I want to be creatively fed as I do it. So whatever you got to do to keep doing that. And then it was just a short matter of time. I don't know how long after that until things started to really kick up. And, you know, had I stopped then, you know, there's a book, my buddy Mike Shimshak, who I do the podcast with, it's called like 5 Feet from Gold. It's a story about a silver or gold mine. I think it's a gold mine out west. And the guy literally went penniless digging for gold, and he stopped. He was 5 feet away from it, and he sold it to someone, and they struck gold immediately. And it was like, you are continually 5 feet from gold in the music business. So you got to believe that you're in the right place and you're doing it for the right reasons and that you're the right person for it. But, you know, you just got to keep on. Don't have a plan B. That's another thing I tell the kids, the students at Apprentice Academy. Do not have a plan B. Do not have a parachute. You will pull the ripcord every time.
I like that, man.
Yeah. I'm just going to get this other thing that I can fall back on. Don't do it.
Yeah, that's very true. If you had to give advice to young Joe West, assuming were you open-minded as a kid?
I don't know. I think I've become much more open-minded now that I've seen the world has kind of, beat me into submission.
It's amazing how some people don't, though. They're like, no, I fucking got all the answers. Like, I guess life hasn't beat you up hard enough yet. Keep hanging in there, man.
I think it's super important to have a really big plan, but to be able to pivot at any moment.
Yeah.
Like you can't keep focusing on what it is you think you're supposed to do whenever there's a giant opportunity to the left of it that might redefine who you are. All the success I've had has been rewarding, but also has been on the outskirts, has been things that I've done this on this pathway, and sort of spun around to find the opportunities. So you got to have that, but you got to be an optimist, and you just got to have a dedication to like having peace about what you do.
Yeah.
You have to have a peace about what you're doing, because you'll stay up all night worrying about it. That's why looking back, it feels good to see my career, to say, okay, going forward, I don't have to stress out as much as just try to make the best decisions I can, be a part of the things I'm supposed to be a part of, and and do it.
Any advice you would have given your younger self?
I don't know. That's really tough, because I do believe that, that old Madonna quote where she's not regretful about her mistakes. I am regretful about mistakes.
Are you really?
You should be regretful about mistakes, especially if they hurt people. But I think that they're an invaluable part of your timeline that define, like, I learned how to be a better husband to my wife because I was a horrible boyfriend to girls. They taught me how to love her better,
Yeah.
And I try to do that. And so I don't want those to go away, but I would sure like to take away, if I did do stuff wrong, I sure would like to go back and tell those people that I'm sorry for it. So I don't know I don't think I would change anything. But I think I would find a lot of peace in knowing that it's going to be okay. Right? That it's not going to end in the crash and burn that you are continually paranoid as in the creative fields, that you're just going to wash out and not be worthy of it. You're not good enough.
Sure. I get that. Is there anybody that you haven't worked with yet that you'd like to?
James Taylor. Yeah. James Taylor. I did a Ben Taylor record, his sons. That was pretty spectacular. It's on 550, Sony 550. And I talked to Carly Simon a bunch on the phone but I never talked to James. I don't know that I'd be able to keep it together. I don't know if I
really. You'd be that starstruck with him.
Well, what am I going to tell James? Like, hey, James, let's try a different guitar.
Hey, he needs help the same way everybody else does.
I know, but for me, he's just that guy for me.
Yeah.
He's like a Paul McCartney. It's like, I have been in the studio with like John Oates, where I'm kind of beating him up, and other artists that, people are like, man, you're pretty rough on that guy. And it's like, well, we're making a record here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he presumably doesn't want someone who's going to just say, hey, that sounds great.
Yeah. I don't know that
you're not serving him at all.
I think I'd be enjoying it so much that I couldn't get into work mode with a James Taylor.
With James Taylor?
Yeah.
He's your guy.
Yeah, man. I grew up on James Taylor.
Let's talk about gear for a minute, because I know you got a bunch of it. What's your go-to guitar right now, and what other two would round out your top three?
All right, so for songwriting, if I'm writing during the day, I got a 1955 Gibson J200 that's pretty spectacular.
Wow.
That's for recording. But, if you're writing all day, that'll wear you out. It plays you a little bit. So I like to write on smaller stuff. I got a Martin that I write on that's a Dreadnought. So for that, I think writing a smaller sort of J45 style guitar, but for recording would be the Gibson J200. That guitar never sounds bad. For electrics, yeah. I've got a couple that I really love. I've got the first year, the 59 reissue in 1981, Tim Shaw with the Tim Shaw pickups. It looks just like the one you have behind you.
Yeah, that's the one you were telling me.
Except I have a hardtail on mine, and it's got a Bigsby, but a Bigsby mounted on the hardtail. It's not the B7 that you have. So I've got that, which is just a stellar machine. Tom Bukovac turned me on to that. And I've got another guitar I bought off of Bukovac that is a 60s melody maker that's pretty special. That
interesting.
You
really?
plug it in, and it's that sound that you were trying to get on single coils for your whole life, you know. So that 60s Melody Maker is pretty special. And I've got a custom Strat that I never play. I've got a Montreal Premier from Godin that is one of the best sounding guitars that I own.
What does that look like, the Premier?
It looks like a Les Paul, and it is it's chambered.
Okay, sure.
So F holes.
Yep.
And it's got this great voicing on the pickup, the rear pickup, so that it gets real mid-rangey. So if you're going to do Back in Black, you're going to want to hit that, you know. But it's just a stellar guitar. Tone-wise, it beats out my 335 all the time.
Wow.
Depending on the record.
Wow.
So between those three guitars, it gets it done. I've had so many guitars over the years. I'm trying to get less guitars, just because a lot of times they come in but they don't go out.
Yeah, I get that.
I tell everybody if you've got a wife, all you need is 3 guitars, because 3 is the magic number that they don't recognize the cases anymore. So from that point on, you can have any guitar case in your house, whether you have 100 guitars or 3, and they just think it's one of the 3. You just can't have all 100 of them up at your house. You got to keep them somewhere and rotate them in 3 at a time.
You've seen those memes where, like, you know, the guy is looking at guitars at night in the computer, and the wife is over his shoulder. She goes, he just bought a guitar. Why is he looking at guitars? Very true.
Yeah, man. There's so many good ones out there. But for me, that 335 covers just about everything. And you know, I'm a songwriter and record producer. If I'm going to do something that's really stellar, I'm going to have Tom Bukovac or McPherson or Mike Payne do it. I'm not going to be sitting there shredding guitar solos in my studio. That's just not. I mean, I have the good enough sense to know that there's going to be another guy that's going to kill that. So it's mostly rhythm stuff I'm doing.
He's one of the I had Jerry on the show a long time. He's one of the brightest guys I've ever met, just in terms of his capacity to understand music, tone, and sound. He is brilliant, man.
He's brilliant. Keith used to take him out on the road to get tones. That's how good he is.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
So, and then he wouldn't be on the tour. He'd just go back home.
Oh, you can't, like, literally just to get tones.
Start of this tour, this one Keith had all of his amp. I think they're more like doing Kemper stuff and profile. I know they were using Palmer PDI for a minute on that tour, but they would still have amps to sort of move some air, you know. But back in the day before, whenever the PA was actually playing amps, Jerry would go out at the beginning of the tour and help him get all the tones, and then come back. Me and Jerry McPherson, when I had this loft on Music Row, there was a really great studio. It was an old factory, so all that old glass, hand-blown glass, panes of it all around. And me and Jerry were making a record, producer and guitar player, overdubbing, and there was a tornado coming. So we're on this tornado watch, and they're watching the satellite imagery, and they're saying, it's in Hillsborough, and me and Jerry are just in there playing, and it's like, well, let us know when it gets to, you know, the 18th Street, you know, and we'll get to a safe place. But I could remember me and Jerry just sitting there playing during this tornado, and these lookouts. The artist was there with all this, you know, on his phone. He had all the satellite imagery telling us where the storm was, and there's a rotation near us, and we played through the whole session.
Yeah, he's a great player, great guy. You have a favorite song that you wrote?
A favorite that I wrote. Well, the favorite popular one that I wrote would be Without You. Do You Believe Me Now will always have a soft spot in my heart, just because it was the first as a popular song, you know. But there's so many. You're right. People see these songs, they go, oh my God, you've had X amount of number ones, and then you're like, well, what you don't realize is that there's thousands of other songs.
Yeah.
You know, someone just sent me a song the other day that I had written it with Dan Huff's daughter. She was
that's wild.
Ashlyn Huff. She was an artist on Jive, but we wrote this great song called Sorry I Let You Down. And I hadn't heard it in years, and my buddy just sent me a memo, and he said, man, this is a great song. And I was like, I listened to it, and I was like, oh, what a great song. There's so many of them, if they don't get picked and played, then you don't really remember them even. But hopefully they're all your favorite, the last one you wrote.
I had Joe Satriani on the show, I think twice actually, but the first time he was on, I asked him, I said, what's your favorite song? He goes, you know, the favorite song is the one I just wrote.
Yeah.
Yeah. He says, you write so many. If I can't focus I need to focus on the one I just wrote to make it the best song possible.
It's always nice. Sometimes you'll be on a trip home for a holiday, and the radio will start to play one of your songs, and you don't realize it yet because you're a listener, right? It's just in the car. And then you realize, oh, at measure 3, you're like, that's my song.
How does that feel?
It feels great because
Yeah.
you got to go, oh, this is how I felt about my song when I didn't know it was my song. You know that?
Yeah, right.
It's the 2 or 3 measures where you didn't recognize it until you did. You were like, oh, I was digging this. That's cool. That's cool.
That is cool. That is really cool, man. Favorite musicians you've enjoyed playing with?
I was in this band called the Rust Belt. That was great. It was essentially me and Dave Behanish were writing all these songs together. I was producing him. He was a great artist, still is. And we were writing all this stuff. And then we started playing out we went from playing Third and Lindsley, which is the big sort of rock club here. We were playing it and, there's nobody there. And by the time we were done, you couldn't even go off stage to go to the bathroom.
Oh, that's cool, man.
That band was Tom Bukovac on guitar, Jimmy Lee Sloas and Mark Hill on bass, depending on who was available that night, and Sean Fichter on drums, who was Peter Frampton's drummer forever. And I played in that band. I played keyboards.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I would capo my keyboards to every key that I wrote them in. So if it was in G, I would just capo it, so that I could play it, and the guitar mind took over, the lizard part of my brain. But man, those nights I always wanted to quit that band just because it was a little bit of a hassle playing out. But I'd play a gig and then I'd be like, okay, I'll do one more.
Yeah.
And then finally my wife had a birthday and I missed one and I just
then you quit it.
Band. But it was great.
What great musicians there, man.
Yeah.
I had Mark here on the show. Lovely guy, man.
Mark Hill?
Yeah, really sweet
Mark
guy.
Hill, for my money, Jimmy Lee Sloas is just magic. And Mark is every bit as good as Jimmy. I think he sort of came up under Jimmy and was like a big fan of Jimmy. But Mark Hill is the sweetest person ever. But on bass, that guy, I try to not talk. When we're tracking, I try not to, unless I'm missing something. I'll say, hey, I wish you'd get more up into the melody here. But I'm never doing that thing that I used to do as a kid. They talk about regrets, where I'm micromanaging these players. Telling the drummer, hey, 1 and on the 3 and give me more backbeat, and I want your hat to be more focused on the upbeat. I'll do it if I have to. But I really want these guys, they go into like math mind at that point, and they just play like drum machines. Like, I want them to be there for who they are, their artistry. And it's like, then if it's totally wrong, we'll re-steer stuff. But Mark's one of those guys that his playing is so good that I'm blown away by something and I want to remember to tell him about it. And then the measure after, he plays something that blew my mind from the other thing.
Wow.
His feel, his pocket, his notation. He's the guy in the session that's going to give you these charts with notation with 30-second notes strung together.
Did you know the story with him and Jeff King, the first session that Mark ever had? So, you know Jeff, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
He's a practical joker. So the first session Mark ever has is he comes to town. He's a little bit older at the time. And I think the story goes, Jeff hands out all the tracking for everybody, all the, what do you call it? The Nashville,
the charts. Yeah.
The charts. Right. I'm sorry. The national number charts. And he gives Mark the wrong one. He purposely, and so they're all playing. This is Mark's first ever session in Nashville. And of course, I don't remember who it was for, but the guy's like horrified. He's like, what the hell's going on? And everybody's like, but everybody was in on the joke. And so everybody's like pointing at Mark and he's like shriveling as a human being. Like, what the hell? I'm doing this. But that was a Jeff King thing. And of course they get over that, but
he's such a good dude. If I'm making a record, odds are Mark's on it.
That's good, man. Yeah. That's good. Top 3 Desert Island discs just for right now.
CDs?
Yeah. Top 3 CDs.
All right. Songs in the Key of Life.
Stevie Wonder, yeah.
Yeah. James Taylor's Greatest Hits.
Dude, give yourself a box set. You love the guy. Come on.
Carole King Tapestries.
Oh, so you like that whole era.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of new ones, too. Like that Jamiroquai record is still a rocker. I just turned my son on to it. That Jamiroquai record is, it is Songs in the Key of Life from modern days.
I have their guitar player on the show, Rob Harris. He's been with them forever. He's a nice guy.
Killer band.
Yeah, really good band. Great R&B band.
And of course, Rage. And then there's like Rage Against the Machine. I mean, Bulls on Parade, Evil Empire, that Brendan O'Brien record, Matthew Sweet, 100% Fun. I mean, I could go on and on. Steely Dan. I have their box set. I don't even know what records on what songs on what record.
Yeah.
For that, and any Beatles record, Sgt. Pepper's.
You cut off. You're cut off. Last call. Best decision you ever made.
Don't box me in.
Tell me the best decision you ever made.
Marrying my wife. She's the key to the success I've had in the music business, is like the unlimited support.
Yeah.
There's never been a time I've seen all my buddies with wives and girlfriends that have started to heckle them. My wife has never not believed in me.
That's awesome.
Like, when I thought that it was like maybe time to throw it in, she'd always be the one that was like, if that's what you want to do. But she has been the grounding force, completely supportive, 100%. And if you're going to be in the music business, you got to have somebody that does that.
Yeah.
The other biggest thing was I bought a Pro Tools rig in 1998 that changed.
Wow. Early.
Yeah. I spent $12,000 on a Pro Tools rig, a Mix Plus system.
Holy
and it was,
crap.
For me at that time, my parents had paid $12,000 for their house that they were still living in. So for me, it was a huge decision. Me and my wife debated it, and I pulled the trigger on it. And the first record I did, which was a Tom Kitt record. He's now a Tony Award winning Broadway guy, musical director and playwright. That first record paid for the Pro Tools rig.
Right on. You're good with, and this is I think a big secret about successful people in general. You're very disciplined. You're able to believe in yourself and delay for tomorrow, a benefit tomorrow. A lot of people can't do that, man. They're just like, like they can't even go to the gym or do anything. The discipline is a tough thing for a lot of people.
I think that I have a fear of the undisciplined half of me. That vacillates between 49 and 51% in me.
Yeah.
So that's why I make the decision to only be part of records that I really think I can make a difference on, that it's the right thing for me. Because if I fall into that other mode where I'm just phoning it in, I'm the worst version of myself. So as good as I could be equally as bad. And I fear that. So I try to not put myself in a situation where I could start to do that.
Yeah. You set up like prevent controls almost.
Yeah. It's out of fear. Out of fear. Watching my family and my dad working for $5 an hour when the steel mills were down with a family of 5. In 1988, he made $12,000 that year. I remember him talking to my buddy's mother. They were talking about making it and the financial problems they were having. And my dad said that he had made $12,000 that year, and he had a family of 5. And we ate, we had a roof over our heads, but it instilled in me like, hey, you can make a little go a long way if you do it the right way. Always work if you can work.
Yeah.
Right. Make the right decisions. But, some of those things that were sort of put into me via fear, like the fact of like, you have to do this or you won't survive. Some of those things have become my greatest assets in regards to, hey, I do that, but I do that based out of fear. Yeah.
Whatever. You're making a good decision.
Yeah. How many times do you stick your finger in a light socket? One time. Right? These are not.
You hope.
Right.
Some people spend a lifetime putting. What's that expression, man? I heard this one time, and it's really funny. It's true though. It said most people are born, and then they spend the next 50 years looking for a place to plug their umbilical cord into. You got a lot of that.
I haven't heard that.
Yeah, you got a lot of that.
Well, I like to think that that I've learned. I don't want to repeat the same mistakes.
Yeah, of course.
Genuinely want to do better.
Especially if there's other people involved. Family and stuff like that, man.
Right.
I totally get that. Hey, tell me what makes you happy.
What makes me happy is hitting the space bar or listening in the car to something that you just finished, whether it could be a mix that you did that just lights you up. It could be a song that you wrote. It could be a record that you produced. We so rarely get paid for the music we make that you better be getting payment one way or another. So at the end of the year, if you could fill up your tank just out of the love and the satisfaction from, hey, let's face it, none of us at 15 years old was thinking about making $100,000 a year.
Right.
We're thinking about making music. So it feeds to that, like the reason why you do it. So that would be, that's the best feeling. And then, of course, getting accolades and people stopping and taking notice and celebrating a gold record party or a platinum record party or a Grammy or a hit song #1 party. Those are great too.
Very cool, man. Do you have any non-musical superpowers, Joe?
I can I can lay on a couch and not get up for 6 weeks. I've got that completely in me.
You got that gene,
Where
huh?
all I do is grow fingernails and hair, you know, I'm like a werewolf.
Any hobbies outside of music?
Yeah, I ride motorcycles. You know, I've got a Harley Davidson that I've had for 20 years that I ride. No, music is it. I do film, and
Yeah.
you know, I have a love for that. So, you know, I love telling stories, and whether you tell them by film, or most of my film stories are told about music stories. So it's very related. But my whole life is music. It is creativity. Trying to, like, I've changed sort of my moniker of like, oh, I'm not a songwriter. I'm not a producer. I'm not a record producer or a mixer. I'm not a filmmaker. I guess I think they're all the same muscle. So I'm a creative entrepreneur. Like, whatever it is, that is, if there's creativity involved, I'm there. I'd love to.
You don't
love to
care
try
what
it.
the canvas is.
No, I just want to be a part of something that's really like, stand back afterwards and say, oh, we did that.
So what? I know you're a cigar smoker, man. What kind of cigars you like?
I like the Cuban stuff. I like Cohibas. I like Monte Cristos, number 2s. I smoke a lot of those. Hoya de Monterreys. I love those. The Epicure number 2s. The Bahique, which is the Cohiba, that's sort of the Rolls Royce one, is great. We haven't been able to get those because there was a big storm. But I smoke, I like those Cuban cigars, and there's some Partagueses that I like. But the ones I really like are premium cigars that you can get out in the real world that aren't contraband. A lot of the Perdomos are great.
Mm-hmm.
I love Perdomos. I smoke a ton of those. And I know Nick. I've been down in the jungle.
Have you really? That's so fun. How do you know him?
So Jerry Goldenson, who's the president and CEO of KHS America, they own Honer, Sonar, Hercules Stands. They own 21 musical brands, tons of stuff.
Right.
I think he introduced me to him, and then I went down with Jerry. Jerry and I went down to Nicaragua, went up in the jungle 150
to
miles.
One of his fields?
To where they make Perdomo cigars, where they grow them and roll them. So, yeah. And there's two brands. I won't bore you too much with this, but Byron.
No, I'm a cigar smoker. I'm a cigar smoker, so that's why I'm asking you. Byron
and Atabey. These are two
I've never
brands
heard of.
Two brands owned by the same gentleman. He was in charge of the marketing for Cohiba. In the Atabey,
Attabae.
Okay. I'm the worst speller.
How do I never? I mean, like, I'm an active cigar smoker. I've never heard of either of those brands.
They're a little bit more pricey. I like some of the Davidoff stuff too, but like in that $30 cigar, 30 to 40.
Oh, that's a high price cigar, man. I'm not smoking those, Joe.
That's okay. I don't smoke them. They aren't my daily drivers. But when I get together and if I can get a hold of one, I'll smoke the living daylights out of them. But it's the same guy who was running the Cohiba sort of marketing in the. This may go. You may want to edit this out. But so here's the cool story. Atabey, Cohiba is a hut. It's a traditional native Indian, Cuban-based hut where they would go to pray. Okay, so whenever you are in the hut, you would smoke and you blow the smoke out. You blow it to the high priest. That high priest was called the Bahique, which is the name of their premium cigar. So Cohiba is the brand. Bahique was the what you would call the high priest there. And then he would blow it out of this Cohiba up to the sky, and the god was Atabey. So that's the link between all those brands. Now, it's not a Cohiba cigar. It's just that he was involved in the branding and the marketing for Cohiba. So this guy's new brand is called Atabey. And it's a spectacular cigar. I will buy you one and send it to you.
You know what I smoke when I'm smoking a pricey cigar is not the Padron, the 1964. Man, those are the best. I've
had mixed results. So Near Z,
really?
who you had on.
Yeah, he and I were talking cigars as well.
Near Z and I, in our families, were down in Florida, in Panama City. We had this. We went over to their little apartment where they had rented, and we had eaten some pasta, and then we had like a dessert, like a chocolate cake. So we're on the balcony, and I'm eating this chocolate cake and smoking a Padron, an anniversary one.
Yeah.
And it was maybe the best cigar smoking experience I had against the bourbon, against the
chocolate,
cake, and that cigar. I tried to recreate it and have failed miserably. So, but those are great cigars.
Yeah, they're really good cigars. You know what? You ever smoke a brand, and we'll move off this, Roma Craft? You don't make a bad cigar. If you like a strong cigar, Roma Craft's a great cigar. He was an independent boutique guy 10 years ago. Now he's, I've never smoked. I've never seen a bad rolled cigar of his. I probably smoked 1,000.
Do you smoke daily?
I try. I don't smoke a full cigar a day, but I will generally always go out for a walk or sit on the patio for 20 minutes. And
yeah, it's probably if me and my wife will hang out on the porch and smoke maybe an hour every night. So,
your wife smokes as well?
No, I smoke. She secondhand smokes.
She watches. Same thing here. 2 more questions, man. Toughest decision. No. I don't ask. Talk about an experience that changed your life or changed the way you think about things.
That's wild. Geez, I'm sure there are plenty. I'll probably remember one that would be better than another, but there's decisions I've made all along where I've had to make a decision whether I was going to be happy for my friends when they were having success and I wasn't. I made the decision to be happy for them, and that was like I became I kind of wrote up on a sheet of paper the person I wanted to be, and sort of through living that way became that person. Like I don't want to think bad of the guy with the Keith Urban competition, right?
Sure.
I don't want to think bad about, different things that happen and that you feel like you're a victim. I don't want to dwell on them. So I make the decision to move on. So there's been moments in life where I've decided I'm going to stop doing that. There's times whenever I'll do something, my son will say, "Hey, Dad, I didn't like it when you did that to me." And I'll be like, not in the moment. I'll be like, "I don't know what you're talking about, but next time I do it, point it out to me." And they'll do that.
Yeah. And
I'll change. So I can't think of a good example in the music business where I've done it other than pivoting, whenever I had an opportunity. I think I'm always in the business of trying to find a way to be better. I want to make sure that I'm in the right place doing the right things. I don't want to be part of the problem. Yeah. I don't want to be that heckler, that guy that's the last guy off the Titanic that you don't want in your lifeboat. I don't want to be that person.
Oh, yeah. And last question, tell me the biggest change in your personality over the last 10 years and tell me how much of that change has been intentional and how much is just a natural part of aging.
I think moving to Nashville was a big part of this, but I was so intense in New York and early on making records. The records were so important to me that I might have micromanaged and squeezed some of the potential out of them. Mm-hmm. Whereas as I got older, I learned to just chill out. And that I have the answer if nobody else has it. But like if I get a band in my barn, I've got a big barn that is really easy we could track 5-6 guys at a time. It's easy. And if I bring in the right guys and respect them and love what they play and love them as artists, I'll let them just play the song down 3 or 4 times after I play them the work tape. And even though I wrote the song and I have an idea for where it should go and I'm stressed out and I want it to be great, I let them mess around with it because 9 times out of 10, they're going to go somewhere I wouldn't go before. So the chilling out of my production where it's like, you know what? I've done this. I know I can make it great eventually. Let's see what these guys can do. Let's see what they can add to it that I can't. How do I make it better than me? If it's going to be better than me, I can involve some other people in it and then be a crucial part. So I learned to be patient and provide opportunities for people to really be the best versions of themselves. When you have a near Zian playing drums, last thing you want to do is micromanage that guy. Yeah. He's an artist.
And you know what? That's the best. I've said this since I've got involved in this and I started to learn about Nashville and meet all these guys. There is no greater value, no greater bang for your buck in music than going to Nashville and having session players work on. I mean, there's no greater value that exists. Yeah. These guys are such pros and they're so creative and clever. So.
And I think they generally have the guys that I'm working with, and I don't usually go more than 2 or 3 seats deep in any position. If not, I'll move the session, right? But, those guys, when they're in the room, they want the best for that stranger that they just met, and maybe they're coming in with their songs. They're not just looking at their phones, biding the time and smoking cigarettes on the porch. They're in it, like they're in the rock band. They're in the band, and they want that person. If they're saying that doesn't feel right, they're like asking them a bunch of great Socratic questions to get what they need because they want it to be great for them. And it's a Cirque du Soleil environment in a lot of these sessions where it's like, we just did that. That was incredible. So much better than if any one of us had micromanaged it. And that's maybe the tip top of like the enjoyment, the adrenaline endorphin rush you can get from being in it. It's being on a record date like that and making a record, and especially if you wrote it and then eventually it goes on to be a hit, and you're like, you just want to remember every moment of it and what made it become so extraordinary.
Very cool. One more question. What's on your agenda for next? Anything exciting coming up?
What am I got going on? I got the school in the fall, Apprentice Academy semester. I've got I'm mixing a record out of New York right now. I've got a film project. I got the new podcast that we just did. My schedule is like, it's a triage situation. You know, certain things step up and say, you got to do me right now.
Triage.
But there's always 4 or 5 things hovering around what it is, you know, and then you're all in on one, you forget about the other 4. So half of it is like, I had another podcast before this morning. I shot 2 podcasts yesterday of my podcast. And the one I was on this morning was a different time zone, you know, somewhere else. And so I just usually look at the day when I wake up and it's like, okay, what are we going to do today? You know?
Well, hey, let me tell, first of all, thank you very much, man. You have some great stories, man, and some really cool stuff that you shared. I really appreciate it. It's very kind of you. So thanks, man.
Well, you're great, man.
Thank you. Let me tell people where to find you. So Joe's got some cool stuff going on that a lot of people listening might want to take advantage of. First of all, he's got an audio engineering and production school called apprenticeacademy.net. And why don't you talk about what you do there, because you'll get it all screwed up.
Yeah, no, it's not really a school. We like to think of ourselves as the anti-school, no books. It's all hands-on. It's how, you know, if you were a plumber, you'd teach your kid how to be a plumber. So it's very blue-collary in its mission statement. It's super small. We do it on-site here in the fall. It's a 16-week program. It's certified by the state of Tennessee as a post-secondary education unit. We're about to get the GI Bill. So, you know, we put a lot of time into doing the business side of it right.
Yeah.
But we really focus on small classes where people have breakthroughs. Everybody's experience in this class, they'll learn a core curriculum that will make them competent, but it'll be tailored to their own personal. One might be a songwriter. One might want to be a mix engineer. One might want to work in broadcast, you know, for television and film. So although they all take the same curriculum, they all come out. It's very tailored to what they are. And I was telling you before we went on air that as a byproduct of it being such a small thing and so hands-on, we've had 16 graduates. So we only have classes about 6 to 10. We don't let it be any bigger than that. I bring them onto my record dates. In the course of that, we've had 7 Grammy nominations and 3 Grammy wins.
That's awesome, man.
7 out of 16. I mean, I wish I could just seal it in the books there and use that as our percentages. But
yeah, our Grammy percentages.
I think it speaks to the philosophy of why we do it. You know, you have to do anything great, you have to buy into somebody else's why they want to make a record and you should be a part of it, why they want to do this thing that you want to now help them go do. And our why for it is, I want to be the kind of school that if my son had the opportunity to get into that school, I would do anything to get him into it. That is that's the basis for like why we do it. And we end up being great buddies. All the graduates hang out and keep in touch with each other and throw work around. It's a really special thing that I'm in charge of because I own it, but it's like, I feel like it's a motorcycle gang, you know, more than it is a school.
At your studio.
Yeah, we do it at the barn, but we also have a distance program. We're licensed to have a distance program. So we have a HD system and we've had graduates, Texas, Chicago, and the distance program is fantastic. It's incredible. We use Sling Studio, and I think sometimes the guys distance have better views than some of the people in the room. Because cameras are like up under the snare drum, and you know, it's a really cool little system that's working out great. And
you put them up in the barn during the semester?
No, you know.
No, I'm just kidding.
It's not a horrible idea.
I was just messing with him. Like, what?
Other than the fact that I have to work around this and have them hanging out eating cereal behind me.
So if you want to check that out, and man, if you're gonna learn mixing and engineering, this is the dude you want to be with. He's been around the block for sure, man. It's apprenticeacademy.net.
Yep.
Also, if you want to connect with Joe and have him help you work on any kind of production and engineering, go to his website, joe-west.com, and hit him up and contact with him there. Remember, it's a minimum of $100,000. No, I'm just kidding. No, just connect with him there and talk. Send him an email. Please don't.
Depends on the record.
Yeah, if there's an asshole tax.
My rate is anything between $0 and $100,000.
There you go, man.
It's dependent. I do a lot of things for free.
There you go. But reach out to, now please don't, everybody listening, don't say, oh man, I'm going to choose and do my shit for free. Just like be professional, reach out to him and let him know why you want to work with him, what you think he can help you with, so on and so forth. Also, Joe made a documentary. This guy's like, remember In Living Color?
Yeah.
That's you. One job. You got like 14 things going. Joe made a documentary. It's a really nice story. It's called Limb, L-I-M-B. It lists like limitless, but limb is L-I-M-B, a documentary. Why don't you talk about it? Because it's a really nice project.
Well, as part of the school, I was like wanting to compel these guys to see the world. The school is really a philosophy of how you see the world socially, right? How you're going to get and keep business, as well as technically how you're going to see the audio world, how you see sound, right? And what you believe the rules of that world is. And I was scrolling up Facebook and I saw this guy born with no arms or legs that it was just an incredible dude. He was making macaroni and cheese. He's going up and down the stairs. This guy's like blowing my mind. And I thought to myself, if I could show this guy to the guys in my school, the engineers in my school, if I could put that grit that this guy has in, they'd all be Grammy Award winners. And I thought, isn't that interesting that the success is more about your determination to do it? So we made this documentary that's like, it's really such a cool thing to be a part of, where we just go out and I go out and meet them in Utah, and we go write a song on the side of this beautiful mountain in Bryce Canyon, and then fly back to Nashville and do a full-blown recording session with, all these guys that we've been talking about today, and just documented the whole thing. And the moral of the story is like, hey, there's no reason why you can't do that thing that you thought was impossible. This guy can do it. You just got 10 fingers, 10 toes. You're already ahead of the game.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was the ultimate sort of advertisement for the Apprentice Academy, but it turned into this little documentary, this half-hour documentary. It lives on YouTube. You could search it. If you go to limitless.com or...
Do you have a channel on YouTube?
Yeah, I think it's called Inspired Docs.
Great.
Inspired-Docs. If you just search LIMB-ITLESS, ITLESS, Adventure Songwriting, you'll find it on YouTube for the time being. It's
awesome.
It's a great watch.
You're entering it in some festivals.
Yep.
When does like, how does that, when does that?
It's crazy with this COVID-19 thing, because you don't know what is what anymore, right?
Well,
so
yeah.
Are they going to have them? So we're figuring out, I'd like to get the word out, not that we're necessarily trying to monetize it, but I just feel like, if not now, when? That's the moral of the story. And it's like, we need that. If you're living your whole life, I see all these people that are miserable being $250,000 a year as a lawyer, whatever. It's like they really want to be a drummer, and there's a version of your life where it doesn't have to be all drums, but if not now, when? And you can do this. Things are doable. People do them all the time. It's a matter of you committing to do it and deciding to not take no as an answer, getting to a place where you know what your level of success is.
Right on. Well, check that out. It's called Limitless, LIMB-ITLESS. It's a documentary. It's on YouTube. Anything else, man? Did I forget anything?
Oh, me and my friend Mike Shimshak, another hit songwriter, have a podcast called From the West Barn.
Sorry, yes, From the West Barn. It's right here. Yeah, talk about that, man.
If you go to FromTheWestBarn.com, you can see podcasts of us. We talk to tons of session musicians. We actually talked to the Senator Marsha Blackburn about some music legislation. So hit country artists. We have John Rich coming on. We've got a ton of really interesting entrepreneurs in the creative world just talking about it. Sort of like a Joe Rogan stream, like what we've been doing today.
Very cool. Very cool. From the West Barn. Check it out. And don't forget, it's a beautiful day in your neighborhood, man. Hey, thank you for everything. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
I had a blast.
Stories, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Everybody, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this, please share it on your social media channels. We appreciate that. Also, support Joe West and check out all the stuff he's doing. Again, if you're interested in audio engineering or production school in a very small environment, in a great place to learn, go to apprenticeacademy.net. Podcast, check out From the West Barn, Limitless, LIMB, ITLESS, the documentary, the movie. Production and engineering stuff. If you want to work with Joe, go to his website at joe-west.com. T-shirts, mugs, and koozies will be there as well.
I got to do it now.
Thank you, man.
I feel like I'm like P.T. Barnum here, but yeah. I mean.
Wait, there's more. Thank you, man. I appreciate everything. Everybody, most importantly, please don't forget, most important, man, remember that happiness is a choice, especially nowadays,
Amen.
man. So choose wisely. Be nice. Go play your guitar and have fun. Till next time, peace and love, everyone. I am out. Joe, thank you so much, brother.
Thank you.